What's up, everybody? So a few weeks ago, I put up a poll to see how many of you actually want me to make an arm wrestling guide. And surprisingly, it was overwhelmingly positive. So everything I've learned in the past 1 year and plus X amount of months and how I've interpreted my just like progress in arm wrestling is kind of what I want to cover with you today. So the goal of the video, I want to help introduce arm wrestling to new arm wrestlers, as well as introduce some specific nuances of arm wrestling to kind of the more intermediate people that have already been arm wrestling for quite some time. So this video will be a bit different than my usual content because it is serving a educational purpose. It will be a long video, but by all means, you don't have to watch the whole thing. I will have a table of contents and a timestamp code in the YouTube video when it launches so that you can reference what you actually care about right away without needing to kind of watch and pick through all of the content I'll be talking about today. And also, this video won't be kind of like a one-of-a-kind video. I will be posting beginner guides every so often, incrementally as I progress through my arm wrestling journey, just to update you guys on what I think is the best new method, or what I think is the best approach for just like getting into arm wrestling or getting into the more intermediate stuff. And in addition to that, I think like the success of this video would be determined by how many people actually kind of bookmark it or save it as a future reference so they can come back and look at whatever they need as a guide to progressing in arm wrestling. All right, guys, so first things first, we're going to get you familiarized with the table. So very common thing on an arm wrestling table is the elbow pad. And if you turn it over, you can see it has like two screws sticking out and they're a bit offset because this will determine which side you're going to be arm wrestling on. So if it's on the right side, you're going to be arm wrestling with your right arm. And if you switch it over, you can arm wrestle with your left arm. Next up, we got the pin pads. They also got the screws. Depending on your configuration of your table, you're going to have a series of holes where you can put it for certain kinds of pins. So depending on the promotion of the tournament, they might have them here. Generally, I've seen them kind of right down the middle. You also have the pegs as well. This is for holding. This is for safety and leverage and strength. So you want to be holding on to these at all times, because if you're not, you'll get fouled and you may lose the match just by not holding it. And another thing, these things I generally, once you kind of start getting used to arm wrestling, I don't like to use these because they give you this weird psychological need that you have to pin on them. But in reality, you can pin wherever you like, preferably on this side way out here. Just letting you know. So generally, this table specifically is a legacy table. This is kind of like more of the classic table. It's made almost completely out of steel, except the tabletop is made out of plywood, thin, coating or piece of leather or fake leather just to cover it for style. Maybe adds a little padding to it. And then these are also made out of plywood and just more thicker padding. The bottom of the arm wrestling table, so it's connected off of the posts. There's an H bar, so this is kind of like a center bar where you can just put your lead foot forward and use it as leverage. So most tables should have this. There are ones that do not, and they have just straight up posts that you can drill into the ground and have it be, stable that way. But I typically don't prefer these kind of tables. And then you got your posts. There's 4 posts. You can use them to your advantage. You can kick off of them. You can wrap your leg around them. If you have good flexibility, you can even put your foot on it. But we'll get all into that a bit later. Just kind of wanted to introduce you the arm wrestling table. Now that we've introduced what the arm wrestling table is, we're going to get started on setup. So one of the first things I kind of want to help you guys visualize is arm wrestling isn't just an arm sport. It's a full body sport where you need to be able to link your entire body as a really strong, immovable chain. So in order to do that, I always start from the bottom because legs aren't as complicated, but they are important for arm wrestling. So let's say you're arm wrestling with your left arm. Your left leg is going to go forward, directly forward, and find the the H bar where you can kick off or leverage. And then your leg is going to be kind of flexed, right? Knees are a little bent. You don't want to be straight leg, kind of how you don't want to do that for like squatting or leg pressing. You just have a little bit of bend at the knee. Your right leg and your hip are going to be pointing that way because you're going to be going into this direction for pinning. Right? So I got my legs, they're ready. You're also going to want to make contact with the table. Typically, I line up my hips first. So I'm like down the center. That way I have room to go either way. And then I put my legs forward and my right leg sideways. So what I'm going to show you is like a neutral setup because this will help you learn the basics, develop your strength in this form, and then depending on how you progress in your style, so you might be more of a top roller, you might be more of a hook, but this style, this neutral style, can help you transition into either or. So this is why I highly recommend kind of like a neutral style. You're going to want to keep your back straight. You're going to start flaring out your lats, kind of like a bodybuilding pose. When you put your elbow down, you're not going to be resting. Because if you rest, your shoulder won't be flexed, your lats also won't be really that flexed, your back's going to be relaxed. So you're going to be kind of floating the whole time. All right. And then your shoulder is going to be kicked forward. So even though I'm straight like this, both shoulders are kicked forward. So you're kind of trying to flex your traps forward. Right? So that engages another part of your chain, right? Then you're going to find your working angle. So a lot of guys, they like to just really tight here, get this as close to the shoulder as possible, but that starts disabling certain muscle groups. It's too tight. And then if you start like this, you're not actually ready to be flexing, and then someone will pull you apart really easy. So you want to find your working angle. So typically, the working angle is about right here, 87 degrees, 90 degrees. So maybe max right here. So if you feel the tightness right here, loosen up just a little bit, and this will be your working angle. So then now if I push, my muscle braces, and it feels really strong. So you got your working angle. Next up on the chain is your riser. So I'm going to do another side profile. The riser is your radial deviation, which means your ability to flex your wrist going up, kind of like a hammer curl, but keeping your wrist completely flexed. So you never say never, because there are situations where your wrist can be like this. These are very specific situations, but for now and for the near future and maybe a few years into the future, you're going to keep your wrist completely locked like this. So that's another part of the chain. So we got the setup like this. And the last thing after the riser is your pronator. So the pronator is a little muscle right here. You know, mine's still growing. Yours might not even exist if you're just beginning in arm wrestling. But the pronator allows you to pronate your arm in this motion. So you want to keep this locked from the start. Some people, they don't prioritize their pronator. They kind of go supinated. So this might be a case if you're doing a hook, but you want to keep your pronator very engaged, especially in the very beginning, just to get you used to using these muscles, right? So now this is what a setup looks like. You want to keep your forearm as vertical as possible, higher than your opponent's, so that when you guys grip up, your knuckles are going to be at a higher level than your opponent's. This will give you a sort of height advantage where you can utilize your leverages. And then finally, let's say you want to pin. You're not going to pin like this, which you can. You can totally pin to the side, but you're going to want to pin back there, kind of like in judo. You're going to want to throw someone, like hip throw someone over your shoulder. It's going to be kind of like the same concept. So when you pin, boom, you're pinning way out here and your elbow's moving with you. So your elbow is going to be at the very front middle for now. And depending on, let's say I'm left arm, and you're going to want to pin, and your elbow is going to end up way back to the right. So like that. And while you're pinning, the whole time your hip is connected to the table. You never want to pin like this. You actually lose power, and you increase your risk of injury. So always keep your hip to the table and pin. Also, this arm, always flare it out and keep the elbow up. This has to be a sort of habit that you have to develop really early on, because a lot of guys, they arm wrestle like this, and they go for the pin and they can't because this is blocking them, and then they have to open up the elbow and get the pin. Right? So pretty much explains the basics of setup that you guys can now try to practice on your own. All right, so now that we got basic setup out of the way, I want to talk about safety, right? So arm wrestling is a sport where there is an inherent risk that you might get injured, right? So it could be a very typical injury like a small muscle tear or a tendon tear or something small that you can recover within a couple weeks, right? But there are cases where bad technique and bad form results in a humerus break, where this is too much twisting is happening on this bone here. And then it breaks right here. Sometimes, depending on your elbow's integrity, you might break your elbow in half. So part of arm wrestling is knowing how to pin and knowing how to keep your body tight and knowing how to lose, right? So let's go back to our arm wrestling position, right? So one more thing is your chest is also engaged, right? It's keeping you in. It's kind of like you're doing a fly. You're always, the number one rule, you always want to keep your arm within the line of your shoulder. So if my shoulders are pointing this way, your arm should be within. You never want to arm wrestle kind of like this, where the arm is outside of the shoulder, because this forces that torsion to happen. So let's say we're losing, right? So there's different concepts of losing, right? There's losing the center on this on the sideways plane, right? So kind of losing here. So then maybe you're forced to twist your body this way to keep your shoulder in line with your arm. So in this case, you can still kind of fight, but instead of trying to torque this way, you can kind of pull back and try to win center this way, because you can lose two ways. You can lose this way and you can lose this way. So maybe you've lost this way, but you're winning this way. So you still can get an advantage in arm wrestling. So whenever you're on this side of the table, you always want to be pulling this way. And as well, keeping your riser and your pronator engaged as much as possible. You're going to want to pull back. Now, let's say you lose this way and this way. And by this point, maybe you're outstretched like this. Maybe you are wrist up, like no pronation whatsoever. By this point, I mean, even in practice, unless you're going up against someone that's really weak, you're not going to win this. This is a really good way to injure yourself, especially your wrist, like a TFCC tear, because you're going to be starting to try to twist your wrist. You're going to be kind of like this. And my best recommendation is just lose, right? Just you're gonna lose. And that's just to be safe, right? It's okay to lose. And then when you're in a tournament, if you ever get to this point in a tournament, you're gonna lose. But 9 times out of 10, unless you put yourself there on purpose because you can get out and you're strong. So another way to lose in arm wrestling is to tilt your body. So the same way that you're trying to win like this, you can lose, right? So your shoulder is always outside of your arm, so you can just lose. You won't get hurt this way. Now if you're pinning, so like I said, if you want to pin, you're going to want to pin like this. But as you're trying to pin, you get weaker and your opponent might get stronger. It's because you're separating yourself from your body, you're trying to do the pin. So when you're pinning, your arm might get outside of your shoulder, kind of like this. So now you're still trying to pin, maybe you start doing some weird things, so you're like under the table, things that you should not be doing. You're putting a lot of twisting here with your internal rotation. That can also result in some kind of injury or arm break, which is also very dangerous. So kind of keep that in mind. Always keep your arm inside, flex your chest like you're gonna do a chest fly, and then this should help you go with the motion, right? So this is all static. All you're doing is moving your body, and it's doing all the work for you. When you do arm wrestling practice, you might find people that are able to turn your wrist over. You might find people that'll be able to make your riser dumped. You're gonna find people that can bend your wrist back or stretch your bicep open. These are all different scenarios, and they're kind of indicators, kind of like little hints about what you're missing in your training. So then you know after practice, oh, maybe I'm not doing enough of this kind of exercise. Now I need to do more. Next time you go, you're a bit tighter. They can't open you up. You can work on a defensive position, and then you progress like this. All right, guys, so I brought my dad over here today just to help do a grip setup so that I can give you guys a better visual demonstration of what you have to do when you actually grip up with someone. So we're going to put our entire focus right here, right? So generally, new people, they really want to put their webbing in there, push their thumbs forward because they think this is going to be a really good grip, right? But if you can see here, I can barely get my fingers around his hand. So it's actually not really good grip because you're not covering enough surface area. You've made your hand a lot smaller. See? So if you're gripping like this, even like this, you're making your hand a lot smaller, and this is something that you see quite often on the table. So what I usually go for is making my hand as big as possible by putting my thumb back. So when we grip up, I have this much extra space to go around, right? So now I'm at So now we've closed and we have our grip, and I have a lot more surface area covered with my hand. And I can actually feel this ridge, this bony area on his wrist, and it makes me feel secure and comfortable, kind of like you're trying to climb a wall or something. You want a very good ridge that you can push off of and continue going. So in addition, because I'm pushing my thumb out so much, now it's harder for him to get enough surface area on my hand. So just kind of a pointer on kind of what to do with your hand and what to look for. Yeah, so and then you only ever want to cover the tip of your finger or just one finger over your thumb specifically for top row. You never want to do two. All right, so once you get your grip, next thing you want to consider is charging up your riser, right? So the riser is the radial deviation of the wrist. This is what keeps your arm locked up and ready to go into arm wrestling. And as you can see, my riser is so much stronger that my dad's wrist is dumped now because this is an indicator, your opponent might have a weaker riser. So radial deviation is the act of going up, right? So it's like this. But riser is a bit more complicated than that. So there's a bunch of little muscles in the wrist and bones, and then there's two long bones connected to your, or like two like longer bones that are making up most of your forearm. So what I kind of think about when I try to flex my riser is I start with the pinky area, right? So first do this with a closed fist. So you try to really squeeze on the pinky, like in the midsection. You're kind of making your hand flex, and you're getting this side flexed. Now that's flexed, right? Next, you got this side. Same concept you do with your pointer finger. So now you got both sides flexed, and to finish it up, you got your thumb. You just want to crank that thumb back. So now you got like 3 really secure points of, radial deviation, getting that riser really secured. This took me a while to really understand. I thought it was just, doing this. Now my riser is secured. It's a lot more complicated. You have to really link up the chain in your wrist. So once you get it figured out with a closed hand, you want to do it with an open hand, because this is kind of how it's going to be when you're arm wrestling someone. So when you get that comfortable, you can do a very soft touch. Like I'm not even putting pressure on him, but I'm flexing my riser very hard. So that's kind of like how you would want to flex your riser. All right, so once you get your riser settled, it's time for your pronator. So a big rule that I go by is always be pronating, right? Because the pronator is one of the top muscles you need to always have engaged no matter what, because if your pronator is not engaged, your wrist will, your entire arm will topple over and you'll just go flat. So that is just very simple. All you're doing is keeping your arm like this, keeping it locked. So press me down a little bit. See how I have my pronation engaged? My dad's pressing me a bit, but it's not letting loose because now I have a stronger pronator, and it keeps you safe, right? So there's no special secret way to keeping that locked up or chained. You just gotta do this, because when you set up and you fully pronate, your arm, wrist, everything is going to be perfectly straight, so you're good to go. I see some people are kind of supinated and then they try to do top roll, but their pronator is completely disengaged, so they end up going, wrist over into the pin pad. So one of the last things I would consider when you're setting up for a grip for a match, and this is kind of neutral position or even top roll, is controlling your opponent's pronator. So it can be done in different ways, but the preferable way, and this is kind of where having stronger fingers comes into play, having better connected fingers, is actually putting some pressure on this knuckle area. So when we start arm wrestling, if he's trying to pronate too, he can't, because I'm pressing him down. I'm pressing him down with my finger. So then that gives me leverage and an advantage also to cup and then open him up. So another really important tip just to look for when you're setting up on the table against someone is getting as much height as possible, right? So you're only going to meet in the center, and you don't want to go on their side because they're going to have more height. You want to make sure both of you are completely center, or you can cheat a little bit and get them closer to your side without them noticing, especially if this is practice, right? But the goal is having your forearm and knuckles completely as vertical as possible, because this will just give you more advantage. So, all right, so I'm completely vertical. He's a bit on my side and stretched out, some pressure. So I feel very good in control. I can open him up. Now, I will let him have vertical. So now my arm is stretched out, right? And this is very, basic physics. His arm is tighter. Now I'm having a harder time keeping my cup, and then he's going to get the pin on me. So this little amount of motion makes a huge difference when you're just setting up, and this is before the match even starts. So you make sure you're taking as many advantages as you can. Grip, put your finger on the knuckle, engage your pronator, lock your riser, and then when they say ready, go, you can just open them up. Really easy. All right, guys, so over 90% of matches end up going to the strap, right? So it starts with a slip. You guys never seen a slip? It'll be kind of like off the ready, go. Be like ready, go, and then we slip. Referee calls a strap. So I'll be showing you how to do a strap, and then I'll show you a few things that you can try to get an advantage in the strap. So first of all, the hands are going to be leveled. Drop the strap. All right. So the hands are leveled, and the buckle is going to go on the side of the referee. And then you're going to loop it around the person's hand who has the buckle. And then you're going to loop it one more time around the hand of your opponent's, and you're going to put it underneath to not give an extra advantage to either person. And then you're going to run it under the highest slot, so like this, and over the lower slot. So now we have the strap, and then we can start tightening it up, right? So you want the strap to be really tight. You want this to be as low as it can be on the arm. It gives you better leverage. And you want your opponents to be as high as possible if you're lucky, but if you have a good ref, they'll make sure it's pretty even. So now before the match, they're going to say, so you'll be kind of like this. They're going to say, now you can get your grip. I start by doing my riser and kind of kicking my wrist back because the strap starts falling down on my hand, and then I get more of their hand, right? So I can get more of their hand. In fact, I can even feel comfortable in touching the strap and gripping around the strap. So it's kind of a technique I use. It feels like I get kind of a little bit of a strength advantage in the strap, at least in my mind, and then we can just start pulling once they say ready, go. So you can say ready, go, and now we're pulling, and then whoever's stronger will get the pin. It kind of starts involving more muscles in your body. If you are using the strap, you're using less of your hand, and everything below this part of the strap gets used, right? So it just secures everything a bit more. So then you can just for the pin. And it's kind of my advice on the strap and how to do it. Let me know if you guys have any tips or advice for strap, because it is a large component of arm wrestling. And then you can put it down in the comments below. I'm interested to know for the people who are more experienced in the sport. Warming up is probably one of the most taken for granted things we do as athletes. Unless we have a coach or someone to beat us in the head to remind us how important warming up is, it is very hard to get yourself in the mindset to want to do it, especially when it involves working out with other people. Their excitement level might increase your excitement level, and then you just kind of skip out on trying to be as warmed up as possible and as safe as possible. So this is one of the best preventative measures to avoiding any injuries in arm wrestling. So you might ask, how do I warm up, right? It's a little specific, but there's two things you can do. Because I'm an advocate that you need to practice arm wrestling multiple times a week at a much lower intensity level. So one thing I do is I consider my entire workout a warm-up. So This involves the warm-up for the workout. This involves the workout in itself. So this could be, pretty much almost a full body workout involving heavily on the upper body and sometimes the legs as well. So once you're done with this, this 1.5 hours or so, however long it takes for you to get done, this is your warm-up. So then you can almost right away go and arm wrestle. So that is one thing you can do. We might be too tired, so maybe you might have a arm wrestling exclusive event where you go and practice with a bunch of different people, and you want to warm up for that. So there's a traditional warm-ups, and I think everyone does these on the table. It's kind of like you start doing some wrist motions and doing circles with your lats and then pinning left to right. That's not bad, but that is also not enough in my eyes. I'm a person who needs a lot of volume to really feel properly warmed up and to avoid injuries, because I've had sustained several types of injuries through some of these heavier practices, right? So some of the things I do is I try to mimic some of the arm wrestling movements that I do, right? So one thing you can always do in practice is bring one of these, right? So resistance bands are very popular, especially in arm wrestling. You're going to see these throughout the community. And you just want to start warming up every part of your body, right? So I would start maybe with some just curls. Get your biceps, get a little pump going. You can even then do the opposite curls. Get your extensors activated. You can even do risers. So, and I'll go in more depth about this, but rising, kind of like what you've done in the setup, you want to put the band over your knuckles, keep your wrist straight, and start pumping out some risers. So now this is going to get your radial deviation warmed up. This is one of many ways to warm up your wrists. Then you can start getting into pronation. So what I do is I put the band across my hand and I hold it like this. And then I do full, so I start supinated and then I try to pronate as much as possible. This is an exercise I'll go over in more depth when we get to the exercise section, but keep this in mind, right? So in arm wrestling, shoulders are heavily relied on. So then another thing you can do is tie a band to a pole and then start doing internal rotations. And I usually do like 20 to 30. And I start repping them out, right? You're gonna get a shoulder pump. I feel like this muscle right here, when you do the internal rotations and even like side pressure, you're gonna have the most pain in this area after you're done with a workout. Or not workout, sorry, arm wrestling, like practice. So if you warm these up, it might not be so tender afterwards. Now, we also want to work on the opposite muscle, so external rotation. So same concept. Keeping your elbow locked, start doing these. Right? So that's just one component of it, right? So again, like I said, your whole body should be really warm. You should get your legs warm, do some, high knees or, even jumping jacks. But if you have access to weights at this practice, you can do some shoulder presses. Or better yet, kettlebells. So I'm a big advocate for kettlebells. I have a lot of fun with these. One exercise that I like to do for warming up is snatches. So this is a 17-pound kettlebell, and it's like the perfect weight for me to do snatches. And then I just bust out like 10 of these. And now I have some cardio aspect done, right? So doing kettlebells is very cardio intensive. but as well as it's very heavy on the shoulders, it really gets your shoulders going. So I get that going too, right? So don't be afraid to bring some kind of piece of equipment to a practice just so that you're able to get your warm-up in. I know some people might be shy around warm-ups outside of resistance bands. Don't let that increase your risk of injuring yourself, because then you're really going to prioritize warming up, and being self-conscious about it won't, it won't really matter anymore, because now you have to do it anyway. It's kind of my tidbit on this. I'm always interested in knowing what you guys do for warm-ups before arm wrestling. Kind of what I do. So if you want to chime in, put a comment below. I'm pretty interested. All right, guys. So this one is strictly for top row because that is a bit more of my specialty. So a lot of this could apply also to hook part of it, and then you kind of have to go the hook route. But this is kind of the general progression, right? So you got your neutral stance, and first thing you need to work on is your cup, right? So when ready to go, you gotta get into a cup. That's step one. So you can just practice this with a partner, have them apply different pressures. And while you're doing that, you want to engage your pronator. So you want to make sure the sharp side of your forearm is pressing against your opponent so they can't turn you over. So do a few sessions like this. This is a very slow progress that takes many months, right? So once you're done learning how to cup, next step is drag. So it's kind of like the lat drag. Like I said, when you start off, you're not completely tight. You have this much room. So cup and drag, now you got this new component. Now you're not only securing your wrist, but you're securing your side of the arm wrestling table. And then this movement, just like the other ones, practice different angles. Try like this, right? You don't even have to pin. You just got to get to your angle. All you're doing is bringing your arm closer to your body. And it looks like I'm putting internal rotation, but I'm not. So I'm just turning my body, right? Another cool thing about the drag is your goal is to hit your ribs or stomach, because your arm will stop perfectly at the edge of the pad and you won't go out. But you will have it at the edge of the pad, which gives you a lot of room to pull them over. So a lot of people, they hit and they stop halfway, but you really want to get to the edge of the pad, and this is a good indicator. So next thing, when you do that, you want to start pronating also. So this is, this little movement right here, pronation. Yours might be more dynamic, but I have tighter arms. So ready to go? Pronation, right? Pronation, pronation. Okay. So you're going through these, right? Now you can try to convert into a posting top roll. Some people, they might start like this. This is kind of giving away your tell, or this can be your style. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. You can convert it into a posting top roll. So once you do this motion, all you really have to do is just sit down, right? Sit. Now you're posting. Now you can pin them like this. You can do a normal pin with side pressure. That's fine. You can also start in the posting top roll position. Kind of like this. You're going to have your shoulder forward. And then you push this one out to make it seem like you're square, but in reality you're like this. And then you put pressure, a lot of pressure on the hand, and you're trying to bend back their wrist. You got to push on their finger to, flip over their pronator, and then just push down the hand and just do a lat drag, same concept. So that's kind of the progression that I've been going through. Last and final thing, right? And I mentioned this in my other videos. So I've been cracking wrists, but not really fingers. Maybe I'm holding on too tight. Maybe they're holding on too tight. I would start playing around with, not even pinning, but try to figure out how to pronate on top and then get their fingers to open up. It's just good practice. I want to cover a few scenarios that you might see yourself in, right? So when you're arm wrestling, it's always trying to read the person's body position. It kind of gives away little hints of what they might do. So first things first is knowing what they might attempt. So you may know this person personally, then you actually know their style, but let's say you've never seen them before. So let's say you're watching them set up. So hypothetically, they set up and their shoulder is very vertical with their arm and they look very tight, something like this, something like that, and maybe a little bit supinated. So this is a really good indicator that they're probably going to go inside and do a hook or something of this sort. Another option is if you see someone that's kind of like this, right? So they might just go into a press. So basically the further out they are, kind of like over their shoulder, it probably indicates that it's going to be an inside pulling kind of person. Now if they're neutral, and they look very confident, then you don't know, right? They can go either way. They can go like this, right? Or they can go back, kind of like that. Now, the further out they go, so if they're kind of like this, now they're probably going to be a poster or some kind of top roll. They can go even lower. So that something about paying attention to the body, right? So I'll give you guys a few scenarios. So let's say I'm, a top roller and I see, well, let's say not just a top roller, but, I can convert to hook too. So you got to be able to switch. So, and your opponent is going to be doing something like this, a posting top roll, right? So there's two things you can do and, you can try for an advantage, right? One thing, right? If they're going to be a posting top roll, you can match it with a posting top roll or just like normal top roll. And whoever has the strongest riser is probably going to be the winner of that match. But they're posting top roll. The arm's completely vertical. What if you decide to hook, right? So if you hook them, they can't really post you because you're covering their pronator. They can't post. They're going to stretch themselves apart because you're going to be tight. So the way hook could win that one is you got to be faster. But hook usually dominates posting top roll if you can get into your secured position properly, right? So let's say your opponent is a person who does the hook. How are you going to defend against that, right? If you're a top roll. So when it comes to setup, and depending on the length of your arm and all these things, the goal of the hook, right, is to get a really deep cup, bone to bone. And during setup, there's going to be a gap on your side. So all you have to do really is just dump your riser a little bit to fill up the gap. And when you do that, you make sure you still have height, but dump your riser a little bit. So they're going to hook. So the moment they say ready, go, you dump your riser even more, and you go into kind of, this is a reverse top roll. So now they can't hook you, their fingers are wide open. So all you got to do is sit pronate, move them over, and then finish. So it's kind of another scenario for hook. Same concept could work for a press, right? Press can do that. You can do the same thing to a presser. I do find pressing is a bit more difficult to counter. But let's say it's a flop press. From what I've seen, flop press, very weak against hook. But flop press, really strong against, top roll or posting top roll. So that's one thing to consider. A good match you should watch is Kamil Jablonski and Ivan Matushenko. So this is the perfect example of high-level flop press versus hook, professional hook artist. So you can see he completely dominated the whole match. Ivan completely dominated, flash every time the moment he gets a secure position. Another thing that can help you prevent presses is really strong back pressure, right? So in order to do a press, you need to be able to get inside your shoulder and press like this, or press and then go outward, kind of like a press pull. You're gonna see that some of the elites, they train like super awkward presses, kind of like that, as a kind of like a last effort to counter someone's really strong back pressure. Because if this is your secure position in order to press, but they have strong back pressure, your arm's gonna get pulled apart, and you won't be able to press. You won't even be able to do side pressure. You're just gonna get stuck. So that's another scenario to really think about. So all these experiences, this is it's kind of what I've been going through, just paying attention to people's bodies, right? Another one. And remember how I said earlier, if you're going to go up against a hook, drop your riser a little bit, not too much like this, don't make it obvious. Because if you go up against someone who thinks you're going to hook and you notice they drop your riser, their riser, well, you don't have to hook, you can just top roll. They've already lost your riser, and usually top roll is a riser battle for the most part. So all you got to do is top roll or even posting top roll, and they'll just go flat. Reverse spin right away. That's another one. So basically what I'm trying to say, these scenarios, they've just happened throughout practice. These are very common scenarios. I mean, they're not infinitely possible. There's only a few styles in arm wrestling. So if you learn to pay attention for these specific things, then you have a higher outcome of using your technical ability to overcome their lack of technical ability or their strength, right? So this is where technician comes into play. So a person who's more technical, they could be, a margin % weaker than their opponent, but if they're more technical, they would win. And then if you guys are of equal strength, the technical person would win every single time. So that's kind of it for this one. All right, so we're gonna kick off the exercises, starting with a bunch of different riser exercises. Riser is a very important component in arm wrestling. It's the action of keeping your wrist deviated, right? Useful. You'll have a lot more success with a really good riser. So, and really just solid wrist foundation. So the way I set up, and you're gonna see a lot of different people set up, I don't really tie it around my wrist or anything. I just line up the creases of my fingers right here where they're starting with the belt, and I just put it over. So the belt's gonna be completely over your hand. I do not put it on my knuckles. Just makes it easier, and it kind of turns it into a pronation exercise. And then there's two ways, right? So we can do the full range, and I'll show you guys how to do that. And there's different ways. Or you can just keep it static, right? But then I still do the dynamic bicep lift. So I'll show you that right now. And one other thing is you want to keep your wrist straight in a line or slightly cupped, right? That's just a thing to consider. So now I'll be doing the example with my 18-pound kettlebell. I just tie it to this, and I'm just going to set up exactly how I showed you guys. I even, sometimes I like to just press on top of this because I am kicking back my thumb. That's your preference. I think it trains the thumb a little bit. And when I do these, I like to have the entire motion going, right? So I start from the bottom, I go to the top, to the bottom, to the top. So the motion at the bottom is going to be way harder than as you're going to the top, or even the middle, right? So you can kind of stop right here and then do the motion. And the weight's going to feel a lot heavier. So it's okay. I mean, your goal is to be as deviated as possible. It's okay if your riser dumps a little bit as long as you can recover it on the way up. So it's kind of the static arm dynamic motion that you can do. You can also do this with a full range of motion like this. So typically you want a lighter weight, and then the motion goes kind of like such, right? So as you're going down, you're going to dump your riser, and as you're going up, you're going to flex your riser. So there's just another element of training and adding your strength. So this exercise is pretty hard the way I do it. Just to give you a reference, honestly, I'm kind of, for my working sets, I'm in my 30 pounds, like 30-pound range for like sets of 10 or 12. And it's very difficult. You get a really big pump. I don't do the regular, just like static lift. I try to get more pump, more range. This is really good for the wrist and development, especially for new guys. I mean, I have really weak wrists in general. This has been strengthening it over time. All right, so the very next exercise I want to show you is isolated riser. And the setup for it is you're going to want like a flat surface, specifically an arm wrestling table or something about waist height. And part of arm wrestling is you want to mimic arm wrestling position as much as you can, right? So you don't want to do a riser like this or something odd, right? So you're going to do your typical arm wrestling position, and you're going to set up on the table. And then you're going to do, this is isolated riser. It's just ulnar deviation all the way to radial deviation, right? So you're going to use a weight. This one is going to be a lot more difficult. And a few key factors, right, when you're doing this. You want to be able to touch your pinky to the belt. That's how you know you've completed a rep, right? So you're going to do ulnar deviation and then radial deviation. It's going to be really difficult. But you want to touch your pinky to the belt. You don't want to end your riser right here because it's not a really complete riser. So the exercise will look like this. And then one more thing, I try my best not to cheat and kind of do like a little curl to like get the final inch, or not inch, but like centimeter to get the touch on the pinky. This is not going to help you. You just have to really focus on really flexing as much as you can, because in arm wrestling, and then as you develop, flexibility is key. You want to have a lot of flexibility in your wrist so that you can gain more cup. And then there's even flexibility in your riser. Certain hands, if you develop them enough, your riser can be really kicked up, right? And that just improves the lock in your wrist. So this is something that's going to take years of development, but you can just start with focusing on the riser directly. All right, so this is one of my favorite rising exercises. It involves using a kettlebell. So
a little bit of prep, I would highly recommend putting on some chalk, improving your grip, because the kettlebell will want you to lose your grip, right? So it's gonna kind of crank at your riser and at your fingers. It's gonna want to open up your fingers. So this kind of helps you develop a stronger grip a little bit. But kettlebells generally are meant to be swinged, right? So when you're doing the riser, same concept applies. You want to keep your wrist leveled, right? And then you're just rising the kettlebell. So it looks like this. You can do it different ways though. You can try from the center, and I honestly think the center is the hardest. My grip isn't quite there yet. It just feels unstable. So I kind of go a little bit higher. I have this support for my finger, and then it feels a bit more stable. So when you're repping these out, you don't want to just bust out like super fast. Kind of like a natural momentum, right? So just a little bit. Boom. 2, 3, 4, right? I mean, if you're really strong, you can try to do it slow. But that's really hard. Because like I said, it really cranks on your fingers. It's not even just about the riser, it cranks on these fingers. So the slower, the harder. A little bit faster feels pretty right. And you can definitely turn these into really good controlled reps. And honestly, I just have a lot of fun with kettlebells in general, so it kind of gives me a little change to my workout, and then I can just start repping out these kettlebells like this. So try it out if you have a kettlebell. I don't recommend too high of weight. So this one's 18 pounds. I think initially it'll be enough, and then you can slowly start raising it. All right, so for the last riser exercise I want to introduce to you guys, all you're going to need is one of the 2-inch or 1-inch dumbbells, the twistable ones, a fat grip, so it doesn't have to be the fat grip extreme. This is a 2.75-inch diameter. It might be a little too big, maybe 2.5 is perfect. And then you're going to want to put a weight at the very end to make, just to give you resistance over the top. So the way I kind of imagine this, right? So a lot of the rising exercise we've been doing, kind of been with belts, right? And they kind of don't really mimic like the hand, right? So the hand's a bit thicker, oddly shaped. So when you're holding this, you kind of want to hold it like you would hold a hand. So the grip isn't going to be perfectly grip lined up like this, but it's going to be kind of like this, because when you hold someone's hand, there's like an angle. So this is kind of what your posture is going to be like, and then your riser is still going to be the same. So when you do these, you want to be angled. So you can hold on to something for balance, and your shoulder and arm are going to be directly at the ground. Then you're going to start rising these, right? But you're going to be a bit pronated, kind of like this much. And you bring it over to your collarbone on the opposite side. So it'll be like this. So you'll know that you're doing the exercise right if your arm is completely lined up. If you start cheating, you'll know, because you're going to start kicking your wrist back. If you kick your wrist back, it's way easier. But if you keep it a little cupped, right? It's a lot harder. And I feel this so much on the grip. It's kind of crazy. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got for rising exercises that I want to recommend to you guys. They're very strict and very difficult because they're strict, So having, if you do them right, the weight shouldn't be as high, right? So if you do these right, you shouldn't be able to do, I mean, if you do a 70-pound riser, oh my gosh, you're world champ, but it'll be really hard. So try them out, let me know. All right, next up we got pronation exercises. So in my eyes, pronator is the most important muscle in arm wrestling. This is something you need to train up quite a bit and keep it engaged at all time. The first exercise I want to show you is the belt pronator with a fat grip. So the point of the fat grip is give it something closer to like what people's hands would feel like. It feels a bit more comfortable. And then it'll help you do the correct motion with the pronator. So when you're thinking of pronation, I typically do just like very full dynamic range of motion pronation. So I don't just put a weight and then have it hang and I just kind of hold it like this. I like to do the full motion. So it'd be like supination, right? And then pronation. Supination, pronation. Same concept with riser, right? So the rep is complete once the belt touches the edge of your like pinky side, so the ulnar side. So when you do these, I line up this with the webbing of my hand. So I get really close to the edge because the belt is going to hang over like this. So I do it all through the hand. I think this develops some much stronger hands and grip. So yeah, I'm gripping and I got it coming over. So when I'm setting up, it'll be like something like this. Just for how you're supposed to set up, right? So then when I'm going, initially you take it slow because this it's an exercise when I get it right. So I start supinated, and then you can hold on to something for balance. So I start supinated, and then I start pronating. You want to also try to keep your elbow from not like leaving your side too much. And then I do the motion like this. One indicator that you can look for is your weight swaying to the side too much? So the motion should be completely up and completely down. You also want to be a little cupped at the bottom. So at the bottom, I'll be kind of like this. And then as I'm doing the motion, it's ending like this. It can end a little higher too. So it'll be like this or like right there. Same concept for pronator isolated that we did for the riser. So you're going to find edge of a table, get into like arm wrestling position, and then you're gonna grab it, put it at the edge of the beginning of your fingers. It's gonna go across your arm. So when you do the pronation, it's just gonna go across the back of your hand, and then you know you did it right if it's touching the bottom of your pinky side, which is like the ulnar side. So I'd also be careful. You don't want to overstretch your arm's ability to do this. You want to stay tight. I wouldn't relax on the down portion of this exercise. So you start out supinated, and then you start pronating. All right, you pronate until the belt is touching the bottom of your pinky. So it'll be like this. And then as you get tired, you might not have enough strength to carry it over, so maybe your pronator ends like this. That's kind of an indicator. Weight might be too much at that point. You want to tone it down. One of my favorite exercises is working my cup. So this is your wrist flexion with barbells, right? So this is a standard Olympic barbell, it weighs 45 pounds. This is something I recommend you guys start with. If you don't have one of these, you can definitely try dumbbell, like the equivalent, the dumbbell version for this. You can even do both kinds. You can do barbell and dumbbell if you just want to switch it up as well. So when I grab this, so I'm going to be in arm wrestling position, but my arms are going to be more so inward. The elbows are going to be touching each other almost, and then they're going to be kind of sticking out like triangles. So the reason why I do that is so it kind of helps me with securing my riser. So every exercise you do, you want to do it as close as you can to arm wrestling. So if you can engage your riser, then you do it, right? So let me give you an example. We're gonna do different variations. So the first one is full range, right? So this is just going from here, going to there. Right? All right, so I'm gripping these outward, and then my elbows are in, my riser is engaged. So then for this wrist curl, you're just gonna go down like this, and then you're gonna pop up. Now the important part is you really wanna flex your wrist and get as high as you can on the curl. You don't wanna end right here, and you don't wanna end being on the flat, flat wristed. So you're gonna do full range like this, boom, right? So this is one component. It's always good to mix these up as well. So there could be another time where you're not doing the full range, but you're just doing static for time. Normally I recommend 30 seconds, 20 to 30 seconds. And then this is kind of a test to see, like, can your wrists withstand the pressure over time? My right wrist starts failing, so it starts dumping like this, whereas my left lasts a lot longer, but then because it's holding up all of the weight, it also dumps too. So there's kind of little signs and weaknesses for what you might have to work on as you gain more experience and strength in your wrists to see where do you have a deficit? Is it for longevity? Is it for range of motion? So you should be able to really, really get that close to as 90 degrees as possible. Some people have double jointed wrists, so that it's more easier for them, but you can improve this over time if you're just stretching these out. So throughout the day, on a break day or some day when you're not lifting, just stretch these out. Constantly doing this, it'll eventually over time help you with improving this. Now the next one, and this one is harder because it involves you opening up your fingers and then closing into a wrist curl. So again, this works out your tendons, your flexors. This one's the harder version. So again, you're gonna open this up. You're gonna hold it on the wider side. Kind of like a triangle formation, right? So elbows tight, and then you're gonna go down and you're gonna let the barbell slide down onto your fingers. So it's gonna be opened up like this, right? So you don't wanna hang out here, right? I'm just doing this for the example. You don't wanna hang out here and it invites injury. So the real motion is gonna look like this. So you're neutral, you start down, and then you quickly flex and bring it back up. So this is building the explosive part of arm wrestling, right? So this is called an eccentric movement. You go slowly down, and then at the end of the motion, you bring it back up. So this one also, you're gonna get a big pump, big burn. It's gonna work everything out. You don't need a super heavy weight for this. Start out light, get used to this, right? So like I said, these barbell motions, if you're not properly warmed up, it invites injury. So be really warmed up. If you have 4 sets of this that you have to do 2 warm-up sets, even 3 if you need. Start at a lower weight on the first set. Start progressively loading until you find that perfect amount. So by the end of it, maybe 2 of the sets, you'll be pretty solid at working load. And next time you know that this is your number, maybe you can add 5 pounds and increase it by that, that logic. So something to consider, really solid exercises for the wrist curls. Same concept. If you have a dumbbell, you hold the dumbbell, you do kind of like side, so you're gonna do arm wrestling position, a little bit of side pressure, boom. Same deal. Riser engaged, and all you're doing, same thing, wrist curling. One thing for the dumbbells, don't use the wheels or the plates that are too big because they're gonna start bumping into your forearms, into your padding here. Use like 5 pounds, 5-pound increments. And then maybe at the very end, you can add like 10 pounds if you're becoming really strong. If the plates are too big, try an edge, right? Because now you get more space for the plate. So try an edge and then try it like this. Another really important part in arm wrestling is the ability to rotate your arm like such, right? So you can do it with a band, right? You can do this, but the one I'm going to show you today, it really involves these muscles here, and then these rear, it's like in the rear deltoid back area. It's like a very specific muscle here. I forgot the name of it, but you're gonna feel a big burn here and a really big burn here. And this is gonna be a dumbbell kind of exercise. So you're going to want, obviously, arm wrestling position. You're going to put your elbow really inside inner thigh, and you're going to go completely sideways like this. So your chest is also going to be a bit engaged. Your arm can be outstretched just to, for stability and posture. But you're going to go down. So be careful. So this initially, you do it as a warm-up. This can hurt. But once you get warmed up, it feels good. You're going to bring this up to your chest, right? So it's not going to be like a bicep curl like this. It's going to be really internal rotation. And if you develop this, it'll give you just a bit more advantage on the table. So once you kind of warm up, get used to the shorter motion, you can start adding a little bit more range of motion, kind of like up to here, and then raise it to your chest. So I'll do both sides just to even it out. So for my left side, it feels very smooth. My right, kind of tender right now. I did a big workout on Saturday. So it's kind of like a form of recovery. So again, this can be eccentric if you're ready for it. And it can be slow on the way down and then boom, fast. And this will just build up those fast twitch muscles in your body, because people are typically, it's about 50-50%. One side leans a little bit towards it. So it's good to develop fast twitch and slow twitch muscles. So you can do it slow, you can do it fast. Just be careful. This one's also kind of risky, invites a little bit of injury, but the reward is great if you do it properly and slowly increase the weight as you progress in your training. So First few weeks, take it easier. Third, fourth week, fifth, sixth, seventh, increase the load a little bit. Drop the reps. So initially you can start with volume, 15 to 20 reps. As you're increasing the weight, start dropping it down to like 10, and then at the end of like, your training cycle, 8, 5, 4 reps. And then you can really see what your max could be, but do not max this out. This is not intended for maxing, it's intended for just like development. So in arm wrestling, it's very important to develop your back muscle. Honestly, the back is one of the most biggest muscles you can really develop, and that added pressure will give you a great advantage, especially if you want to stop really hard side pressure hits, right? So mainly for back pressure, I do a lot of rows and a lot of pull-ups. And I do them different kind of ways throughout the weeks, depending on what I'm trying to work on. So one can be longer dynamic range of motion. One can be tighter. One can be just like isolated at part of the movement. So I'll kind of go over these. And I'm using a kettlebell because for a kettlebell, you get an added effect, right? So if you really grip it with the inside of your hand, you can start training your wrist at the same time. So when I'm doing these movements, let's start out with just dynamic, right? So you want to keep it close to your side. This is kind of how you would do back pressure in arm wrestling, right? Then, if you do your sets and you want to experiment, you can do kind of shorter range of motions. And then obviously if your wrist gets tired, you don't have to hold it like this, but you can do shorter range of motion, like little pulses. This is also beneficial because when you're arm wrestling, you're not able to always extract or retract this much. It's going to be mainly like short pulses, right? So you really just want to flex your back and just be able to get that kind of like development for your muscles. It can be full range, short little motions. And then again with the wrist, if you have kettlebells, I'm a big advocate for using kettlebells. This can also be done with just regular dumbbell that I was using earlier. So rows is highly effective, I recommend. One of my most favorite strength building exercises is doing pull-ups. This isn't just for arm wrestling, but this is general strength building and just improving your quality of life by strengthening your back. I'm not going to teach you all the different ways of doing pull-ups. I'm going to talk about one way that I think makes sense for arm wrestling. So let's just go back to the basics of arm wrestling, right? So your arm setup, right, is going to look something like this. So by default, your hands are going to be neutral. So first rule is I like to do my pull-ups in that exact stance, or at least have my hands be neutral. So I always try to grab it like this. So disclaimer, I do other types of pull-ups, but these are the ones I find most effective, right? So this is part one. Part two, you don't want to dump your wrist. Just like riser movements, you want to always keep your riser engaged. So when you grab it, make sure your riser is locked so that when you go up, you're not like dumped. You're trying to work on your riser. So that's part two. Now, this is the one that I think is probably most important, is keeping it as a eccentric motion. So there's mini pulse reps and then eccentric motion. So eccentric motion is going slow on the way down. So this will break down your muscles, help them grow, rebuild. But you're going to be explosive on the way down. This is on the way up. So this is going to be the part where you're exerting a lot of force to get yourself up. And this is kind of the way you want to teach your muscles to get them prepared for arm wrestling, because arm wrestling is short bursts of intense strength. So when we do our pull-ups, typically like to do them like this.
So start down and then explode, right? And then slowly go down again. So this is one part of two that will condition your body to react quicker, right? So now you got explosive muscles. The next thing you'd want to work on is improving your reaction time through ready goes. And I'll talk about that later, but I think it's two parts: muscles and the way you train them, and then reaction time. So now, the second thing I want to say, most of the time arm wrestling isn't even going to be doing this full motion, right? It's just for general health, right? You want to build kind of like a more static and slower range of motion reps. So when you do these, and I'm not saying do this all the time, but I'm saying add it to your workout. Try to have small range of motion. So it'll be like this. Right, so it will look like this from this side. You can keep it really tight. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And that's what I've been doing to develop my back. So one of my favorite hybrid exercises, so this is going to be emphasis on the back and the wrist, especially like the cup, and building some solid forearms, is going to be the D handle with 2-inch rolling handles. So I bought this one from Mazarenko. You can buy these elsewhere. This was kind of pricey, but it's cool because you can switch. You can unscrew this and switch them out with other types. So if you have a 3D printer, you can make your own grips. But when I do this, I usually do this for reps, 15 to 20 reps, and same concept, right? So you hold it like you're going to hold another person's hand, and if you have a lat pull down machine, this is fine too. But yeah, when I start repping these out, as I'm doing the pull down, I'm cupping my wrists in until they get very cupped. So it's kind of like what they look like. So now I know like this, this is almost a complete, I can go maybe a few degrees more, but this is kind of the cup. I feel a little bit emphasis on the side pressure here in the elbows. Maybe that's me, but if you're trying to keep your elbows tight and then you're trying to do a cup as you're pulling down, I'm sure there's maybe a little involvement in side pressure maybe. So this is kind of how I do them. I've seen them online where people kind of do half reps. In arm wrestling, it's always best to do as cup as you can and train your hand to be in this position because that'll give you an advantage. So try this one out. One of my favorites. This one gives me the biggest arm pumps ever, and it's really good for like Forearm Friday. All right, so for a hybrid riser and brachialis movement that I recommend, and this is very general and everyone's done these before, is the hammer curl, right? But in order to do this correct, there's a few things you have to pay attention to. So one is grip. So the goal is never let your grip weaken to the point that this is giving you kind of like an easy way out because you just can't hold on anymore. This is a bad habit I did back when I did like bodybuilding stuff because who cares about your riser in bodybuilding, right? You're never going to use it. So if your grip starts weakening, I keep saying grip, it's grip, then lower the weight, right? So you need to be able to hold your position like this. This will be good for you. Next up, your riser needs to be engaged. So I've also done hammer curls like this because, in bodybuilding, you're just training out whatever's over here and, screw your riser. Keep it engaged. Keep it tight. This will work out 2 muscles now. So by default, when you're doing hammer curl, your arm's going to be neutral, right?
And if you want to make it a little harder, be slightly pronated. Maybe, so this is 90 degrees, maybe like 5 degrees. 5-degree pronation, or 10. This will affect a little bit on your extensors, just another part of your wrist that you need to keep healthy and just stabilize. Right? So that's kind of it for the hammer curls. The other day we were kind of trying to be creative during training, and we came up with this new way to train brachialis hammer curl style. So I know you guys have all seen this on the internet. You've seen these guys do this lift, so it'd be like this, right? And then when they do this, the belt, the loop, is going through their hand. There's not that much pressure on the bicep. It's just really comfortable. I can just hold this all day because it's kind of like shoulder engaged. Super easy. So the top of the motion, we can all confirm it's very easy. So in training, we're thinking, what if we tie off the bottom part of your hand with another belt, right? So look like this. So you have your belt set up, and you add on a second belt, so you just loop it around to create a lock. At the kind of like at the top of your hand, kind of make your riser a little work for it. So then you can hold on. This will be added grip. So now when you rep these out, when you're up here, guess what? The pressure isn't gonna go through here. You're gonna have your hand work. You're gonna have to keep your riser engaged. And I feel this a lot more in my brachialis and bicep, even at the top of the motion. So you can't do those heavy cheek curls anymore. So it'd be like this. And then I'll show you guys from the other side. Kind of look like this. And then again, you can also slightly pronate it. But yeah, very difficult. I was doing these the other day. And even holding it right here is making this work. Because look at where the pressure is. It's not going through anymore, through the forearm. So I thought this one was pretty creative. I wanted to add it in. Maybe you guys might like it. You just need a regular belt and a short belt. Up until so far, I've only covered exercises involving just a belt or weights or barbell. These things are very common things that you can have easy access to. But hypothetically, you're a bit more experienced and you have access to a table at all times, you have access to a pulley system. I want to show you 3 tools that I use with the pulley that I think would greatly benefit you. So first and foremost, we're going to start out with the belt, right? So first rule, right, when you're doing work on the table, you want to get into position. So foot right ahead of you on the post. You got your arm set up here as if you're going to go into a real match. You got your arm ready. If you're more of like a posting style, maybe you go down a little bit like that. So if we're doing the exercises, and we're starting off with riser, right? So we can do just neutral riser where we keep it activated and we pull it to the same shoulder. But there is riser in different angles, right? So you're not always going to be pulling this way. You might be pulling to this shoulder. So you'd be trying to pull your riser to this shoulder here. And this one may or may not be harder depending on your anatomy and your strength. Another one is defensive top roll, right? You're pulling that way. So this is 3 riser exercises you can do. Now, same concept for, pronator. So you want to grab it, have it in your hand. This is how I've been doing it so far. And I typically like to do it starting out very supinated, kind of like a defensive top row position, and then really, really pronate until the belt touches your pinky side. Right? You can mess around with this, so you can have different positions. I'm just doing neutral, but you can get creative. So let's say you're in the side. You want to stay tight, but really want to pronate. So I'd experiment with these. These are really fun. And it's a good way to kind of get out of the typical weightlifting norms. So now you're practicing table movements, and you're kind of implementing muscle memory so that you're staying within the bounds of the pad. This will help reduce elbow fouls quite significantly. This is another favorite attachment of mine, the 2-inch rolling handle. Honestly, I think this thickness for, so I have an 8-inch hand, right? I think for my size of hand, a 2-inch rolling handle, perfect. So exercises to do with this. One is, well, you want to have the pulley up top, right? As high as possible or kind of relevant to your height, maybe a little taller than me. And this is all variable. So once you get your grip, you want to start neutral grip. You can start, and this is a staple. This is like how you start developing either a top row or hook, is you need to start cupping as much as you can, right? So the deeper the hook, the tighter you are. This is good. If you can't cup that deeply, oh man, this burns. But if you can't cup that deeply, you need to start working on your flexibility. So once you're progressing on the cup, you can start adding a little bit of back pressure. So you're going to do a back extension and a cup at the same time. Boom. Another thing you want to think about is keeping the roll of the handle as stable as possible, right? So if I'm like curling and then I'm doing some weird things with it, it's not stable. So you want to make sure it only spins on one axis. So if you're starting like this and then you start curling like this, then it's incorrect motion. Keep it in plane. It'll really activate that wrist of yours. All right, so this is a fan favorite, the wrist wrench. So mine, it's a little thinner. I think I would prefer the 2-inch one. This is a little bit less, or like 1.75 inch. So you're gonna want to roll it so that let's say I'm left arm. You're gonna roll it to the right, so clockwise, so that when you start lifting it, it makes your fingers want to open up. Another thing, the pulley height. So when I hold this is very specifically, you want the pulley a bit lower than the highest, because this is going to be really hard to rise. And you want to handle this with a neutral wrist. So it'll help you make a neutral wrist better. So same deal, right? So you're just cupping as deep as you can, right? This one's really good for other positions. Let's say you put your leg on the side post. You know, get really deep, have your shoulder above your elbow, and this is kind of a move that you would do for hook, right? Hook also involves having a good cup. So, wrist wrench, highly recommend. It's become more of a staple in my training as well. I recently got it and I really enjoy it. In terms of attachments and handles, I use these the most, these three, the belt, the 2-inch, the wrist wrench. I also have a 2.5-inch. It's a little too thick, but it makes the lift a bit easier. It's just for variability. I also have the skinny 1-inch handles. These are the default ones. If I'm just warming up or trying to do something very specific that I'm learning for the first time, I'm usually use the easier handle. It's easier to grip. It doesn't make your fingers want to escape. But for the most part, I use those three for the most. Okay, what do we got? Training mistakes. So we've all been guilty of these. I'm about to list a few that I think hinder the most progress in arm wrestling. Starting with number 1, ego lifting. I know you guys have seen some crazy lifts on YouTube from Devin Larrett or Levon, 100 kilogram bicep curl or whatever you're seeing, and then you want to replicate this, add it to your program, and you're lifting like 90 plus 100 pounds, but this isn't even working set. This is like your max and all the time, and your form is probably incorrect. So this strays away from strict form. I say initially as a new person, strict form is the best form. It helps you learn your body and your muscles before you start increasing the weight. But if you just want those numbers, then you're breaking away from that form. You're building bad habits. So ego lifting along with just constantly maxing is not a really good idea. I've been on a very strict routine for the past 6, 7, 8 months, and rarely did I max. And I've been consistently gaining strength as I've been continuing. Number 2, arm wrestling for 3 hours. So there are arm wrestling practices. It's like mega practice. 20 plus people are coming, and it's a fun time and kind of gets away from you. So you got to be mindful not to arm wrestle for too long. I have been really guilty of this, especially in the very beginning. And I felt so much pain in the rotators and the bone and the elbows, every joint, tendon, everything. I felt it. And some people enjoy that. They're like, oh, this is how you build yourself up. But this is also how you make yourself weaker. So imagine constantly doing a heavy 3-hour practice like every week. You don't have time to recover in order to do your normal training, the part that makes you stronger, right? So hypothetically, you have a heavy practice on Sunday. You need to be ready, Tuesday to get your trainings going. Otherwise, you do 3-hour practice, your CNS system is shot, you're mentally drained, and then you spend complaining the next entire week. You're just kind of recovering in pain, and you're just doing some blood flow maybe if you can, and then after that, maybe you have another practice. So then you're back at it again. So it's this like endless cycle of pain and torture. And initially you might be getting stronger because you're just putting those muscles to work. But once you develop that initial strength, it doesn't really help you out. All right, so number 3, only training arm wrestling exercises. So yes, there's people and there's famous people that only do that. John Brzik only did arm wrestling. He didn't even do any exercises, as from how he says. And then Devin Larrett does like 6 to 7 different exercises that he always advertises. these are really built strong people. I mean, you need to have a foundation and base. So only training this invites injuries because you're heavily working out these muscles constantly. They're becoming imbalanced. The opposite muscles or other muscles in your body are getting neglected. And then you're kind of wondering why, why does my back hurt this certain way? Why does my shoulder hurt? It's because you're always doing these exercises and you're neglecting everything else. So treat arm wrestling as a sport. Train everything. You have to be an athlete because having an athletic background will give you an initial basis of just being stronger in general, and then whatever arm wrestling exercises you stack up on that, you'll reap more rewards. All right, so and the last one, number 4, is not having a program to track your progress. So there are people that, in the arm wrestling community, they just kind of do a few movements, they do JM presses and whatever, and that's kind of it, right? They're not really in really great shape, they're not athletic, they're not flexible. You need to treat this as a real sport that you're properly training for on a routine consistently without missing a single day or a single week, unless you're like super sick, because this is the way you can build up your body and your muscles and tendons over a long period of time. So great examples are athletes coming into arm wrestling. They're already very athletic and they're able to just push more weight and pull more and just do more in arm wrestling than a beginner. So if you have a strength background in powerlifting, strongman, even wrestling or bodybuilding, this all puts you ahead than the average arm wrestler. A good example, and he's very new to the sport, look at Brian Shaw, world's strongest man. He's already putting a lot of work into arm wrestling. And the cool thing is he can only focus on arm wrestling because he's already built a big foundation, like a very big, solid foundation in strength sports. So his entire body is equipped for this. All he has to do is solidify his arm and then, get the technique right. And then he'll be really solid and really fast. That's one really good example. But honestly, any athlete will have a great advantage over the average Joe that just does arm wrestling exercises. So keep that in mind and consider it for your future plans or goals for training. All right, so that pretty much concludes everything. This is a complete guide to becoming, the arm wrestling guide to becoming a complete arm wrestler. I hope you guys enjoyed. We put a lot of effort into making this happen. This took me about a month of just thinking about it, kind of brainstorming about what I should talk about, what I shouldn't talk about, what I've already talked about previously. So it took a while, and it took a while to film and everything. So I hope whoever watches this gets to learn at least one thing that you can apply in arm wrestling, and maybe from time to time you can reference back. So if that happens, then this is a successful video. So again, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate everyone that's always commenting and supporting the channel. I'm always welcoming more input. Please, if you're new, if you're a reoccurring viewer, comment below if I should add anything else in future videos and discuss something in more specificity in a more specific way, right? And as always, the best way to support me is to subscribe, like, and then share this video, because we're getting pretty close to helping monetize this channel, and I'm hoping this video helps push that along and get me to hit my milestones so that I can start taking YouTube even further than where I currently have taken it. So again, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Come back. Until next time, take care.